Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, brother. I think we're gonna have to stop this because we're getting a weird mic thing coming from you. It's like a buzz.
Check
It's
one,
like,
two.
It seems like a computer sound, but it's just like it's rhythmic. It's like bump, 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 bump.
Oh, how about now? My phone was right on the cord.
That's probably what it was. Yeah.
Check one, two. Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just set that down right down. Okay, cool. I'll bring us in again. It's good to know that. Okay. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me is David Griscom. Hello, David.
What's up, brother?
Not much. Today we are going to do another little clip capsule. This time going in on something that, has been with us. What's old is new again. But this is an issue that I think racial hysterics on the right, hysterical paranoiacs that think like we're being replaced, for instance, they treat like we look at COINTELPRO or like Operation Paperclip like it's a secret thing that's going on that nobody really wants to talk about, despite like one of the richest men in the world talking about it, the previous president, and one of the major cable news hosts. This is something that isn't people aren't allowed to talk about, which is the supposed white genocide of farmers in South Africa. And this was brought up because of our big depressed boy, John Fetterman, who I have to note is cashing in on his depression. He's got a book deal, so he's going to be publishing about what it's like to be depressed as a senator that's supporting a genocide.
Could you imagine? Can you imagine how devastating that's going to be for the ghostwriter?
I gotta say,
to listen to this oaf just be like, and then I got really sad because I was trying to send more bombs to Israel, and these kids, they started calling me a genocidaire.
And the idea that he's doing that for us, like we've talked about this, but he's doing a bipartisan, which means not worth a goddamn, a bipartisan sort of look into depression, which is to say he's not calling for like public financing for people to get mental health care. It's just let's all be aware and also buy my book. And just the way that you commodify, you have this issue with that, and all of a sudden you're going to get a nice advance, probably a few $100,000, who knows, and put that straight in your bank account and act like you're addressing the
Well, that will cure your depression. Did you know that like, the way to cure your depression is to get a nice $100,000 in the bank?
A nice big advance, and then have somebody else to write your book. Exactly. Yeah, you could buy all the hoodies you want now. But so the sort of, and as Greg Grandin, historian, points out, a descendant of early Dutch settlers, slaveholders in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. So Fetterman is an OG, and so he made this statement when South Africa. This is about 10 days ago, when South Africa announced that it's going to the ICJ to try to get some sort of action to halt the genocide that they're alleging is going on in Gaza that we all see. And Fetterman, in his way, said a kind of confusing thing about South Africa, and here's what he said.
And now let's also talk about that. Now we're talking about genocide. And now South Africa is bringing that kind of a trial. Maybe South Africa being able to sit this one out when they're talking about criticizing. Sit it out.
Now, people were like, what the fuck does he mean? Really? Like, does he think apartheid's still continuing? Does he, as we're going to get to the right wing thing, is he talking about white genocide? Fetterman's team came back a day or so later saying, we were saying that South Africa should stick to atrocities like those occurring in the Sudan before they get involved in Gaza, which is, I think the gayest tone pointed out on Twitter, the international relations version of black on black crime. What about black on black crime? Because I don't see, America sticking to the Americas.
Stick to Africa. Yeah, exactly. That's basically what they're saying. Stick to Africa. Okay.
But our boys over at Timcast, including the son of the president who has talked about this from the bully pulpit, Donald Trump Jr., we're talking about this. And what's funny about this is, and you have to check out both Tim Heidecker's Office Hours show and R.M. Brown have covered this important story, which is that Tim had gut issues during this interview and had to leave to probably shit his pants. And so there's a section here where they're cut back to Tim's microphone and he is not there. And I think that is kind of related to what was going on with regards to his gut health. But anyway, here's them talking about John Fetterman.
Would not have passed.
Ackerman
So let's we'll jump to the story from Fox News. This is Fetterman blasts South Africa genocide case against Israel amid unrest, crime. Sit this one out. So the interesting thing is, he's maybe because his brain is broken, he said, when you now look at what's going on in South Africa now, they should sit this one out. And everyone immediately said, in reference to genocide, is he talking about what's going on with the farmers? And of course, there are people who have come up and be like, no, he's talking about apartheid. No, that's not even true. I don't know what he thought he was talking about, but his own statement now is he was talking about Sudan, apparently.
Well, I think they're trying to cover up. I think he actually meant, because he said some pretty, like I said, he's more based than a lot of the Republican senators right now. I mean, he was all for, what was it, U.S. Steel. He came out in favor of, you can't get rid of that. You can't sell it to, I guess it was the Japanese. He came out.
Just to address that, the U.S. Steel point. So John Fetterman, in the midst of all of this, said it's bad that U.S. Steel would be owned by Japanese capitalists. The position that we have as socialists is that whichever nationality the bourgeois is that owns that isn't really the importance. It should be owned by the workers of U.S. Steel. That would be actually based, Trump Jr., not saying, hey, Japanese, get your hands off this company. It should be owned by American capitalists. That's just a nationalistic form of bootlicking.
Pretty pro-Israel. He's frankly actually mocked a lot of the Palestinian, protesters that started going into his office and around that. He's come out publicly as a Democrat senator who a year ago, it was pretty darn woke, said, of course we have to shut down the border. What's going on there is absolutely insane. Of course. So it doesn't take a leap based on the actions of even the last few months to say he was probably talking about the white genocide of farmers, which again, if it's happening to white farmers in South Africa, I guess that's fine according to the mainstream media today, but it's actually happening and it's a real problem. And if we had actual journalists rather than sort of DEI/woke regime propagandists, they'd actually be writing stories about it.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see this kind of development.
At that point there was when they cut to Tim's mic and he is not there. So this other asshole has to fill.
It's fascinating to see his kind of development since the poor guy could barely speak sometimes.
It's almost like the treatment process from the brain aneurysm actually was now he's actually getting better and he's not espousing the insane policies of the left.
That might be the way how you deal with the woke mind virus, but
yeah, so some good reception there for John Fetterman. Yeah, still isn't the greatest speaker, but that possibly related to his stroke. So that's not really the point. The point is that this guy, and I don't think it's. What do I honestly think Fetterman meant? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that Fetterman gets confused when he's up there, and I think he's talking about the fact that because South Africa had apartheid that they shouldn't be able to call any other country out. Completely rejecting the fact, by the way, that the notable thing about South Africa, the reason it means a lot is because South Africans fought to end apartheid. Right. And then broke that system, which is maybe why they take a particular interest in seeing systems like that ending in other countries.
Yeah, and so when people say there's a conflation that's happening here, and which is that if there's any sort of material redistribution that aims to redress historical oppression or inequality, that is taken as a genocide or a genocidal intent, and you see that in Israel-Palestine. You see that in this South Africa case. And here's one of the best episodes of the Michael Brooks show. episode 54, Why South African Land Expropriation is Good. This is a longer clip. I sped it up a little bit, but this kind of goes into it when Tucker Carlson and the President of the United States, the father of that asshole in the previous clip, were going in on this.
The meme
5
about
years
South
ago,
Africa
2008.
and land expropriation has been seized by the worst people on the planet, white nationalists across the globe, those who not only want to make up lies, conspiracy theories, and feed racial paranoia and conspiracy theories today, but they also want to undermine the moral and political legacy of one of the greatest accomplishments of the latter part of the 20th century, the destruction of the apartheid system and the heroic, distinct leadership of the African National Congress, which is, of course, not perfect, has had many problems in power. Most of those problems in power having to do with not confronting capitalism and oligarchy nearly enough. But they did liberate South Africa from one of the most morally obscene systems known to humankind. These people not only are making up lies about the system, but the backdoor subtext of all of these conspiracy theories and lies is an indirect, in some cases quite direct, justification of apartheid in South Africa and a promotion of apartheid South African politics globally. Dylan Roof in 2014 massacred, murdered, committed an act of terrorism in a black church. He was a disturbed, disgusting young man in South Carolina whose resentment, personal failures, and emotional damage transferred itself into a fascination with white nationalism and a hatred of people of color, and also a fascination with Rhodesia, which is what is now Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's followed a very different trajectory than South Africa. Robert Mugabe is a completely different leader than the South African leaders that liberated South Africa. Not just Nelson Mandela, but also Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki, and many other great fighters and strategists. That being said, regardless of Mugabe's many failures and obscenities and the ongoing problems of Zimbabwe, the liberation and the end of right rule in Rhodesia in 1979 is correctly recognized as the right thing. That is not in question. And if somebody is putting that in question, right. And that, is what connects a disgusting, disturbed young loser in 2014 to Fox, one of Fox's main broadcast talents, and our silly, putty-headed, racist trust fund baby president. We're going to get into this more, but first, here is a clip from Tucker Carlson on Fox News, feeding up and amping up the lies, distortion, conspiracy theories, and latent white nationalism about land expropriation in South Africa.
In an Orwellian turn, various news outlets suggested it was somehow racist to oppose the racist policies of the South African government, even Nazi-like. Watch.
He goes to race. And what better way than to give this neo-Nazi propaganda that white farmers are being killed in South Africa, when in fact that is not true, not based on them being white.
So show that clip to anyone who knows South Africa, who lives there, and see how they respond. They'll laugh bitterly. It's ludicrous. It's a lie. The president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, has pledged to change South Africa's constitution in order to legalize the seizure of property without compensation. That's currently being debated in the parliament in South Africa. Even now, the government is trying to confiscate 2 game farms after the owners refused to sell at a fraction of the market price. Everyone in the country understands what these are. They're racial attacks. Okay, say defenders of the South African government in this country, but previous generations in South Africa, under the apartheid government, also seized land on racial grounds. And by the way, that is absolutely true. They did do that. And it's one of the reasons that so many decent people in this country and around the world opposed apartheid. Apartheid was awful and wrong. Things have changed, though. Now our elites endorse the idea of a racial spoils system. And that's the scariest part. It's far more ominous than whatever the corrupt and incompetent government of South Africa is doing. Our ruling class now believes in collective punishment. That is the opposite of justice. Nobody is alleging that individual farm owners in South Africa stole their land. Instead, the claim is that people who resemble them did. And that's enough. Our elites see no problem with that standard. That should worry you a lot. If you got mugged, how would you feel about imprisoning someone who just happened to look like the mugger? How about the mugger's children? Should they be punished too? If those sound like insane questions, that's because they are insane questions. In the West, we punish only the guilty. We do not punish their descendants or everyone with the same hair and eye color. For more than 200 years, pretty much everybody in America agreed on those terms. Now, the people who run our country aren't so sure. Increasingly, they think that generational guilt seems like a fine standard.
So if that seems to you like a masterclass in right-wing sophistry, insane comparisons, and historical literacy, you're correct. Also, those who are running the country are racist idiots who tweet about South African land seizures based off of your segment, Tucker. This is wrong in not only its particulars, but even in its kind of framing orientation. There's obviously zero comparison between apprehending a mugger and addressing the historical and ongoing reality of a policy of land thefts that went on through the 80s in the apartheid government, where people's material resources and ability to make a livelihood were systemically discriminated against and stolen. And what the South African government is proposing, and what even the initial Rainbow Constitution provides for, is the sensible, small scale, and in this case, extremely moderate redressing of land theft that has gone on and went on in apartheid South Africa for decades. First, a couple of reality checks here. Of course, actually, according to the best research and statistics we have available, attacks on white farms in South Africa are at a 20-year low. The expropriation process has not started because the bill has not passed. The new constitutional amendment has not even passed the South African parliament yet. It's in conversation. In 1998, Nelson Mandela said the following, and I'm going to quote now from The Independent. South Africa's President Nelson Mandela warned yesterday that only a fair redistribution of land and its former black owners would guarantee peace as the country emerged from apartheid minority rule. While speaking at an emotional ceremony in the sleepy town of the volatile KwaZulu-Natal province held to mark the handing back of more than 600,000 hectares of land to former black farmers, Mr. Mandela became president in 1994 in the country's first democratic election, said that land reform that his government had enacted in the first year would help right the wrongs of the past. Our land reforms programs help address the injustice of apartheid. It fosters national reconciliation and stability. It also underpins economic growth and improves household welfare and food security. These are all undeniable truths. And the policy under Mandela was essentially that land would be sold back with government support to farmers it had been stolen from. And again, this is not historical ancient injustice. This is literally people that were alive still today who were kicked off of farms.
The immediately preceding generation.
It was, like now. Their land was stolen now. And yes, to do a stupid pedestrian analogy, if you stole some money from somebody 15 years ago and that person and you were still alive, yes, you would have to pay restitution. By the way, and that's correct. There was a big project in terms of war crimes accountability for the stolen art, stolen money, stolen resources of Jews that were slaughtered in the Holocaust. There is a lot of historical basis for getting people their things back that were stolen by governments that oppressed and murdered them, such as in South Africa. Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's centrist, Davos-friendly, former Mine Executive Board member president, wrote in the Financial Times on the 19th of August that land redistribution is essential for South African democracy. He said, quote, "It's been nearly 25 years since South Africa became a democracy, yet the promise of the historical achievements have not been fully realized by millions of people who are unemployed and live in poverty." He goes on to say, talk about how, quote from the World Bank, "As the World Bank observes, South Africa's historical, highly skewed distribution of land and productive assets is a source of inequality and social fragility. It also argues that after skills, current distribution of land is the second biggest constraint to poverty reduction and shared prosperity. In order for South Africa to secure the future and to ensure an equitable and just humane development opportunities as envisioned by our first democratic president, Nelson Mandela, reforms of patterns of land ownership in South Africa is a critical issue. This is why the government has embarked on a process of accelerated land reform and why the South Africans are currently engaged in an intense debate over the prospect of expropriation of land without compensation as one of several measures to achieve this reform. Unfortunately, several commentators have confined their engagement on the matter to sound bites and not substance." I'm going to continue quoting on this because actually the president has outlined this well, President Ramaphosa. "The land question goes back to more than a century, to the 1913 Native Lands Act, which provided legislative forum to process of dispossession that has been underway since colonial times. It confined the country's African population to slightly more than 10% of the land, reserved the rest for white minority. These laws alienated the majority of our citizens from their livelihoods and their places of birth and burial, stripped them of their assets, and deprived them of their livelihoods. Even now, the dispossession of land continues to determine the prospect of millions of South Africans, and it holds back the country's economic development by restricting ownership to a land of small minority. The apartheid regime ensured that one of the country's most valuable economic resources would be severely underutilized."
Yeah, and I just want to double back to like what Tucker says there and trying to say that, look, we all get that apartheid is bad. When he admits that land was stolen in a systemic way, but then he says like, well, we got rid of apartheid. There's no redressing of that theft. And so the idea that the subsequent attempts to try to do what Meager. I'll put this up here. This is from a book called "We Are Not Scared to Die" by Tiffany Thames Copeland on Julius Malema and the New Movement for African Liberation, about the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters, and this kind of goes over what Michael was talking about there. In an effort to provide historical perspective on this matter, a review of Nelson Mandela's position on the issue is important. Mandela, in 1994, had promised the transfer of 30% of the land to African owners in just 5 years, by 1999, through a, quote, willing seller, willing buyer program. But in that time span, only 1% of the land had been distributed. More recently, the debate has focused on Section 25 of the South African Constitution, which is the property clause Mandela agreed to in 1996. It was designed to protect all South Africans' property rights, including white people's rights. Meanwhile, the ANC government promised that the land would be returned to Africans. In almost 25 years after apartheid ended, no one had ever challenged Section 25, which essentially prevented land expropriation from being actualized. Further, the ANC has pushed its goals even more so down the timeline, pledging to redistribute 30% of the land by 2014, which did not happen. Accordingly, more than 25 years after the end of apartheid, Africans still do not own the land. The South African government's Department of Rural Development and Land Reform conducted a private land ownership land audit and noted that Africans were still at the bottom when it comes to land ownership. With regard to agricultural holdings and farms in South Africa, 72% of the land is owned by whites, who have a total of almost 27 million hectares of land. Coloreds owned over 5 million hectares at 15%. Indians own 2 million hectares. And Africans at the bottom of land ownership own only 4% or 1 million hectares. And, this is what happens when you don't actually. Oh, there we go. Yeah, when you don't actually. Stop sharing that. Do anything. And look, this is something we should be able to understand if we understand our own history in America, which is whether it's the end of slavery or the end of Jim Crow. It's okay, we will extend civic rights. You can vote now, you can drive, you can do these things. Now, as to looking at the books and see who attained what in those years previously, where we were literally by law and structure, as white people in South Africa, say for instance, had a material advantage in terms of accruing and exploiting the nation's resources. And so you get to this point where nothing's done about that. Actually, one of the conditions for even those civic rights was this constitutional clause that said you can't actually do this. And so what happened in America is you see a more militant Black Power movement. And what you're seeing in South Africa is you see Malema and the EFF, and they're saying, actually, no, this stuff needs to be done. This is a demand. And so the very first thing that they say is not kill farmers. That's a chant that comes from the apartheid era. That's about this and has been adjudicated in court as about the structure of apartheid. The number one thing on their demand list is land expropriation without compensation. Because who are they going to compensate it with? This is like you go back to Haiti, and they're paying for getting rid of the French feudalism. So this is all understandable. This isn't submerged history, but we have a whole media discourse that is unable to understand these sorts of issues. And it's the same way that from the river to the sea, when said by Palestinians, is seen as that's genocidal. And when it's said by Netanyahu, it's just security policy.
No, I mean, look, and that is such a kind of pesky, ridiculous myth that keeps on popping up in the U.S. about how they're being white genocide. And it's just wild how, first of all, it's already very clear that it's not like a kind of attack on white people in general, like in the abstract, right? It's a very particular, even if you use the framing that they're using, white farmers, right? Well, that's a particular class of people. And I wonder what that interest is there. Is it, skin color, or is it who owns the fucking land?
Right.
And look, there can be excesses and there can be activities that are illegal. There could be activities that are, applauded. All these kind of things are possible in any kind of conflict like this. But to conflate a struggle over land, be it either rhetorical or actually armed, with a call for like genocide, right? It takes a level of historical illiteracy, and frankly a willingness to accept this kind of stuff. And look, it's not surprising why somebody like Elon Musk is very worked up about this kind of thing. It's not surprising like the son of Donald Trump is very worried about people asking who owns the land and who owns the shit in the country that they live in. It's truly amazing that this continually gets brought up.
Yeah. And it's because of these structures though, right? Like these historical, especially colonial structures. And you have these systems in place, and then you deal with you can vote, like I said, like you can vote now. And I do also want to share this video by Turkish TRT World. I believe it's the Turkish YouTube channel, because they actually like cover the Malema EFF Kill the Boer chant song, I think, pretty well. And I think that is something that, again, like we should be able to understand this in terms of the sort of black militancy we've seen in America. That like anyway, here's TRT World on where this chant comes.
This South African song has been igniting quite the firestorm online. Once deemed a struggle chant, modern adaptations of it have kindled cries of white genocide. So why is this song so controversial? Well, it's mostly to do with its lyrics.
Kill the Boer, the farmer.
That chant about killing the Boers, the descendants of Dutch settlers in South Africa. Dubulibunu, which translates to shoot the Boer, was born in the throes of apartheid-era South Africa in the early 90s. Apartheid, which is the Afrikaans word for separateness, was pretty popular among white voters who sought to preserve their dominance over South Africa's black majority. The chant had roots across the political spectrum and was brought back into the public sphere by politician Peter Mokaba after the African National Congress Youth League was reconstituted in 1991, when it grew into a rallying call against apartheid. Dubul Ibunu is one of a number of struggle songs, that is, political anthems that were a key part of the fight to end white rule over non-whites in South Africa. As ANC lawmaker Gwede Mantashe put it in 2010,
"We're not talking about whites, we're talking about the system of apartheid. The biggest problem I have is when journalists interpret Dubul Ibunu as kill the Boer, kill the farmer, which is a vulgarized interpretation of the song."
Apartheid ended in 1994, but the tradition of singing anti-apartheid songs didn't exactly fizzle out. Driving the resurgence of Dubul Ibunu in the early 2010s were some familiar faces. Then President of South Africa and the African National Congress, Jacob Zuma, and Julius Malema, the leader of the far-left economic freedom fighters. Both leaders faced repercussions in court for those actions by right-wing and rights groups over hate speech. In 2022, though, a court ruled that singing the song is tantamount to free speech and that banning it would curtail freedom of expression. So why has Dubul Ibunu been experiencing a resurgence? Well, apartheid may be over, but inequality is far from its finish line. As one South African told TRT World,
"I honestly think that we are far from being economically free as Black South Africans. The majority of the land and the wealth are still in white hands."
Indeed, whites own more than 70% of farms held by individual owners, according to a 2017 government audit. That's even though the white population only makes up 7.7% of the population. Such inequality has served to galvanize support for the EFF, which, according to Malema, is the fastest growing party in South Africa, garnering support from much of the country's black youth. Malema has been using Dubul Ibunu to market one of the EFF's core policies, that is, land expropriation. This article puts South Africa's land issue in perspective. With the population growing rapidly and migration still ongoing, the land issue has exploded. There are millions upon millions of people with nowhere to go in a country where everywhere you look, there are vast tracts of wide open, white-owned land occupied by nothing but sheep and wandering guinea fowl. Deborah James,
So, I mean, basically you get it. That, like with regards to Israel, that calls for redistribution and equal rights are being translated as calls for mass slaughter and genocide, but by the exact people who are doing so to maintain a system of, exploitation.
100%. And I think that it's a really great thing that South Africa has been being a leader again, in this fight today. And the right's gonna, it's something that I think Jean Bachelon said that I think is 100% correct, which is that like a lot of conservatism, modern conservatism, is sort of built around how can we make the powerful seem like they are the oppressed. And this is there's a reason that there is this kind of right-wing fascination with telling this myth about South Africa, because it fits perfectly into this kind of narrative. That the nice, sensible, well-off folks are now being attacked and oppressed because they're nice, sensible, well-off folks, instead of a fight for a justice that is incomplete in South Africa or the United States.
Yeah, and we should actually get maybe someone from Africa as a country or something to look back in on, because South Africa is still attempting to either change the constitution or work around that constitutional block. And it's constitutions, man. It's wild to read about like the 19th century when it's like, this is the way we free ourselves of feudal power. And now it's like, oh, this is the way that those assholes from like 4 generations prior locked us into this sort of property relations. But yeah. Anyways, the most important thing for somebody like Tim Pool to understand is that when Julius Malema is saying "kill the Boer," that is free speech, and that's something that I thought you were in support of.
Yeah.
So let's get our free speech hats out and get some land reform in South Africa.
Well, on the notion of free speech, Matt, before we go, we do have some very important breaking news that we have to break down. I don't know if this has come across your desk yet, but none other than Meatball Ron has dropped out of the Republican primary for president, has just released a video dropping out. I was wondering if we want to play a couple seconds from it.
Yeah, well, I composed myself, I guess.
I mean, who could have seen this one come? I mean, did you see I will admit, we weren't planning on doing anything on this, so I didn't have this prepared, but I saw on Twitter something about Ron DeSantis's like campaign chief in their Iowa office playing puzzles in their campaign office, and people were complaining about that. Exclusive. In the week before, I'll pull this up and then we can play this video and say,
did he endorse?
I don't know. I haven't, out of respect to the important thing that we were talking about, I didn't listen to the video yet. But exclusive, in the week before the all-important caucuses, Scott Wagner, the head of Never Back Down, the Ron DeSantis Alliance super PAC, was doing something that aides found puzzling. He was literally doing a puzzle, which has made it a little bit interesting. Some of these things about Ron DeSantis is people are like Cernovich are already here. We'll play this video and we can get a reaction to it. But right here already, Mike Cernovich, Matt's good friend, is saying you need to fire a lot of people. This is assuming your candidacy was a legitimate attempt to win. So there is some kind of talk here, but let's see. We'll play a couple from the beginning and then we'll go to the end, because I know he's just going to blabber on towards the middle. But let's see.
Greetings from Florida. The warmth of being home is a reminder why I've chosen public service. From joining the United States Navy and serving in Iraq, to representing the people in the U.S. Congress, and now serving as governor of Florida. And it reminds me why I decided to run for president, to fight for those who have been forgotten in this country. This is America's time for choosing. We can choose to allow a border invasion, or we can choose to stop it. We can choose reckless borrowing and spending, or we can choose to limit government and lower inflation. We can choose political indoctrination, or we can choose classical education. These choices are symptoms of the underlying struggle to ensure that constitutional government can endure and that Western civilization can survive. And we launched this campaign to bring accountability to government, regain sovereignty at our border, and restore sanity to our society. We cannot succeed as a country if we allow our nation to be invaded, our currency to be debased, our cities to crumble, and our kids to be indoctrinated. The DC elites who facilitated this mess.
Okay, so let's get towards the end here, see if he gets anywhere interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just doing stump speech right now.
Right.
Autopilot.
Yeah. Is he going to endorse Haley is what I'm curious about.
That is interesting. I mean, yeah, we are getting this live, y'all, so we'll have to update y'all more on Tuesday, but let's see.
Finally, I want to thank my wife, Casey, and our kids
here we
are over. I thank all of our honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesterday. They see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him. Well, I've had disagreements with Donald Trump, such as on the coronavirus pandemic and his elevation of Anthony Fauci. Trump is superior to the current incumbent, Joe Biden. That is clear. I signed a pledge to support the Republican nominee, and I will honor that pledge. He has my endorsement because we can't go back to the old Republican guard of yesteryear.
Literally, he's the old Republican guard. The older one. Okay, fine, sure.
Yeah, I mean, so complete cuck. That's sort of it now. I mean, it's just going to be Miss Haley. Let's see.
It might be good for Haley. I don't know.
I mean, it's the best situation for Haley, right? I mean, I don't know how else to read it.
But it's funny. It's funny because like he did good enough in Iowa to where he could have probably stayed in if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, he probably got a call.
This is surprising though, because it's like, I guess maybe he's going to be in the administration. That's probably it. We'll give you it because like he can't be governor of Florida again.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got to do something, and I don't think he wants to do Fox News. So
no, I mean he can't be in front of a camera. So maybe he'll
actually having him as a cabinet position would be pretty fucking horrible. Actually.
Oh no, it'd be an absolute nightmare, man. So I mean, yeah. So Ron DeSantis, who I think it was very clear. I mean, I think it's been clear for a really long time that Trump sort of has this in the bag. The whole idea that people were going to, both Vivek and DeSantis, I think, proved a thesis just completely wrong. That there was a kind of fiery branch of the Republican Party who wanted all the kind of anti-immigrant politics, all of the kind of super right-wing conspiratorial politics of the Donald Trump campaign, but without Donald. And I just can't imagine, looking at what we've seen over the past 8 years of Donald Trump being a major political figure, and missing the fact that it's like, no, these people want Donnie. That they like some of his ideas, but Donald Trump's cult of personality is a very, very compelling factor for him, at least in the Republican Party. And they don't like the knockoff version of Ron DeSantis, or whatever the kind of super drug through Reddit that Vivek was trying to cultivate.
There was always a theory that was exactly what all these losers wanted to hear, which is that all you need to do is own the libs. And that's what people loved. And that's not what people loved about Trump. Trump did that, and he did that better than any of those Republicans. But he would also own the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And he's always done that. And that's always why he's been popular amongst, aside from being in pop culture, synonymous with rich guy for a few decades. But like, it always was funny. The DeSantis people thought like being the most anti-trans or the most like into grade school libraries was going to be a winner. Trump was never that guy. Like Trump is concerned with like prices of like on the world market. And if you can get like skimp a contractor, he's not concerned about like the culture war shit. And somehow all the DeSantis people convince themselves like, actually, we have the real Trump here, and it's wild what delusion can do, I guess.
Well, in conclusion, Matt, I mean, this might be the most boring primary season of my adult life, of my voting life, at least. Is that the same for you? I mean, in fairness, 2000, 2004, I was too young to have any conception of it. So for me, it's 2008 plus, but
No, 2004 was real because you had Kerry, and everyone thought Kerry
Mhm.
was going to save us from the war, and that didn't work out. And yeah, 2000, obviously 2008, that was huge. 'Cause that
2012.
was 2012. Yeah, exactly. Because yeah, it's usually more interesting than this, but everyone it's just incumbents, and I think it's probably doesn't say much good for democracy.
No, I think it says actually a very bad thing about democracy. But I know Matt Leck is very happy because it means he's not going to have to stay up for a bunch of Republican debates.
No, see, honestly, the Republican ones are fun.
Yeah.
It's the fucking Democrats that make me want to kill myself, and I shouldn't say that on Oh my god, to hear Kamala Harris talk to Joe Biden.
Oh man.
Oof. Anyways,
Well,
yeah.
folks, we'll have more on that on on Tuesday in the main show. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on this bonus episode. Just did want to mention to our international audience, apparently Patreon is giving folks trouble. So please double check your membership if you're paying in a currency that's not the US dollar. We got an email that they're going to bump most people who have foreign currencies. And it's not a permanent thing. So just check your membership, because basically what they said is they fixed the problem, but they've sort of they've auto deleted people. So you have to re-sign up. But anyway, appreciate all of y'all so much. We'll be back on Tuesday with the main show. Take care and have a good rest of your weekend.
Peace.